Everyone laughed when he walked away. Nobody laughed a year later. Part 1. The man who left everything behind. The laughter started before Ethan Carter even reached the door. It echoed through the grand ballroom of the Imperial Crown Hotel, bouncing off crystal chandeliers and marble pillars as hundreds of guests watched one of the most humiliating moments of his life unfold. The annual Carter Group Gala was supposed to celebrate another record-breaking year for the family business. Instead, it became the night Ethan's reputation was buried. Standing on the stage beside his father, Ethan kept his face expressionless while reporters snapped photographs. His younger brother, Ryan Carter, stood proudly next to their father, smiling confidently as applause filled the room. Ethan, their father announced into the microphone, has decided to pursue other opportunities outside the company. A ripple of confusion spread across the audience. Everyone knew that wasn't true. The truth was much uglier. Ethan wasn't leaving. He was being pushed out. For 10 years, Ethan had worked harder than anyone inside Carter Group. He graduated from one of Shanghai's top universities. He spent years building overseas partnerships. He personally negotiated contracts worth hundreds of millions. Many of the company's most successful divisions existed because of his work. But none of that mattered. Because Ryan was the favorite son. Ryan was charismatic. Ryan was charming. Ryan knew how to impress people. And most importantly, Ryan knew how to take credit for other people's achievements. Over the years, Ethan watched project after project get transferred into Ryan's name. Whenever something succeeded, Ryan received praise. Whenever something failed, Ethan received blame. Still, Ethan endured it. He believed loyalty would eventually be rewarded. He believed hard work would eventually matter. He believed his father would eventually see the truth. He was wrong. 3 months earlier, Carter Group had launched a massive expansion project in Shenzhen. The project was Ethan's idea, his strategy, his execution, his team. Everything was moving perfectly until Ryan interfered. Against Ethan's recommendations, Ryan made several reckless financial decisions. The project collapsed. The company lost hundreds of millions. When shareholders demanded answers, Ryan blamed Ethan, and their father believed him. Or perhaps he simply chose to. Either way, the result was the same. Ethan became the scapegoat. Now he stood on stage while his father publicly erased him from the family business. Our family wishes Ethan success in his future endeavors, his father continued. The audience applauded politely. Some looked sympathetic. Most looked relieved. Nobody wanted to be associated with failure, especially not in Shanghai's elite business circles. Ryan stepped forward and wrapped an arm around Ethan's shoulders. The gesture appeared affectionate. It wasn't. Only Ethan could hear the whisper. "You should be grateful," Ryan said softly. Ethan looked at him. Ryan smiled. "This is better than what I originally suggested." For a moment, Ethan said nothing. Then he slowly removed Ryan's arm. The smile on Ryan's face flickered. "Congratulations," Ethan said calmly. Ryan frowned. "On what?" Ethan glanced around the room. "On finally getting everything you wanted." Then he turned and walked away. The laughter began immediately. People assumed he was defeated. Broken. Finished. They whispered as he crossed the ballroom. Some didn't even bother lowering their voices. He lasted longer than I expected. What company would hire him now? Imagine losing your position to your younger brother. Pathetic. Near the exit, Ethan paused briefly. Not because he was hurt. Not because he wanted to respond. But because he realized something important. For the first time in years, he felt free. No expectations. No obligations. No family politics. No constant struggle for approval. Everything had been taken from him. And strangely, that felt like a gift. Without looking back, Ethan walked through the doors. The laughter followed him. None of the people laughing realized they were witnessing the beginning of their biggest mistake. 2 days later, Ethan packed everything he owned into 3 suitcases. The luxury apartment provided by Carter Group was gone. His company car was gone. His corporate credit cards were canceled. Even some longtime friends had stopped answering his calls. Amazing, Ethan thought. How quickly people disappear when they think you're no longer useful. His phone rang. The caller ID displayed an unfamiliar number. Ethan answered. "Hello." A warm voice replied. "Ethan Carter?" "Yes." "This is Victor Hayes." Ethan sat upright. Victor Hayes was a legend in international finance. Years earlier, Ethan had met him during a conference in Singapore. The older businessman had offered mentorship. Ethan politely declined. At the time, He believed his future was secure. Now that seemed almost funny. Mr. Hayes, Ethan said. It's been a long time. I heard what happened. Of course he had. The business world loved gossip. I appreciate your concern. Victor laughed. I didn't call because I'm concerned. That caught Ethan's attention. What do you mean? I called because opportunity rarely arrives disguised as success. Ethan remained silent. Victor continued. Tell me honestly, were those failed projects actually your responsibility? No. That's what I thought. Ethan frowned. How? Because I reviewed the reports. That surprised him. Why would you do that? Because talented people interest me. Victor paused. And because I've spent 40 years recognizing when someone is being sacrificed for political reasons. Ethan leaned back. For the first time in months, someone believed him. Someone saw the truth. Thank you, Ethan said quietly. Victor's voice hardened. Don't thank me yet. What do you mean? I'm offering you a choice. Ethan listened carefully. I recently invested in a struggling technology company based in Hangzhou. Victor continued. Most investors think it's worthless. Is it? No. The answer came immediately. They have excellent technology, terrible management, terrible strategy, terrible leadership. Ethan couldn't help smiling slightly. So you need someone to fix it. Exactly. Ethan stared out the apartment window. Hangzhou, a struggling company, an uncertain future. It wasn't exactly the triumphant comeback story people imagined, but something about it felt right. What would my position be, he asked. Victor laughed. Officially, yes. CEO. Ethan blinked. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he stood. You're serious. Completely. The older man's voice lowered. Ethan, everyone thinks your career is over. I know. They're wrong. Silence filled the room. Then Victor asked a simple question. Are you finished? Ethan looked around the nearly empty apartment. The life he once valued was already gone. The reputation he fought to protect had already been destroyed. The bridges behind him had already burned. There was nothing left to lose, and everything left to gain. A slow smile appeared on his face. No, Ethan said. I'm just getting started. 3 weeks later, Ethan arrived in Hangzhou. The company was worse than expected. The headquarters occupied 4 floors of an aging office building. Employees looked exhausted. Equipment was outdated. Morale barely existed. The company's name was Novatech Solutions. It specialized in artificial intelligence software. Its products were genuinely innovative. Its leadership was catastrophic. The previous CEO spent more time giving interviews than managing operations. Investors were fleeing. Revenue was collapsing. Bankruptcy seemed inevitable. As Ethan walked through the office, employees barely acknowledged him. Why would they? To them, he was simply another executive destined to fail. In the conference room, department heads gathered for his first meeting. Most appeared skeptical. Several looked openly hostile. One man didn't even bother hiding his contempt. His name was Daniel Brooks, Chief Operations Officer. 30 years in the industry. Known for being brutally honest. Daniel crossed his arms. So you're our new CEO? Yes. Daniel glanced at Ethan's file. You're younger than I expected. I'm 32. That's young. Ethan smiled. I suppose it depends on perspective. A few people chuckled. Daniel didn't. The company is losing money. I know. Our best engineers are leaving. I know. We have 6 months before investors pull funding. I know. Daniel leaned forward. Then why did you take this job? Everyone watched. Waiting. Testing him. Ethan looked around the room. He saw exhaustion, frustration, disappointment. But underneath it all, he saw something else. Potential. The same reason you're all still here. Confused expressions appeared. Daniel frowned. And what's that? Ethan answered without hesitation. Because despite everything, you still believe this company deserves to survive. Silence followed. Several executives exchanged glances. Daniel's expression softened slightly. Only slightly. Ethan continued. The technology is good. Heads nodded. The employees are talented. More nods. The products solve real problems. Agreement spread across the room. So why are we failing? Nobody answered. Because everyone knew. Leadership, strategy, direction. Everything had been broken. Ethan placed a folder on the table. Inside were dozens of pages. Detailed plans, operational reforms, financial restructuring, product development strategies, employee retention programs. The result of 3 weeks of nonstop work. I spent every day studying this company. He pushed the folders forward. Starting today, everything changes. The executives opened the documents. As they read, their expressions gradually shifted. Skepticism became curiosity. Curiosity became surprise. Surprise became disbelief. The plans were detailed, practical, aggressive, and most importantly, they might actually work. Daniel finished reading first. Then he looked directly at Ethan. For the first time, the older executive showed genuine respect. How long did this take? 3 weeks. Daniel shook his head. No. He tapped the documents. This level of analysis. Ethan understood. Years. The answer was years. Years of learning. Years of mistakes. Years of watching successful businesses grow. Years of watching bad leaders destroy good companies. But Ethan simply smiled. A little longer than 3 weeks. For the first time, Daniel smiled back. Very slightly. Good. Then he closed the folder. Maybe we finally hired the right person. For the first time since arriving in Hangzhou, the room felt different. Hope had entered. Not certainty. Not confidence. Just hope. But sometimes that was enough. Outside the conference room windows, rain fell across the city. Most people would have looked at Novatech and seen a dying company. A lost cause. A failure waiting to happen. Ethan saw something else. A second chance. And this time, nobody would be able to take credit for his success. Part 2. Building an empire from the ashes. The first 6 months were brutal. Ethan Carter quickly discovered that saving a company was much harder than building one. Every morning began before sunrise. Every night ended long after midnight. There were no glamorous interviews. No luxury events. No reporters waiting outside his office. Only endless problems demanding solutions. The company's finances were worse than anyone had admitted. Several major clients were preparing to leave. 2 investors had already drafted exit plans. Competitors were aggressively targeting Novatech's remaining customers. At times, it felt as if the entire business was held together by little more than determination and luck. But Ethan had no intention of failing. One by one, he began solving problems. Unnecessary departments were eliminated. Bloated management layers disappeared. Resources were redirected toward the company's strongest products. Employees who had spent years feeling ignored suddenly found themselves sitting in meetings with the CEO. Engineers were encouraged to challenge executives. Ideas were rewarded based on merit rather than politics. For the first time in years, people felt their work mattered. The transformation wasn't immediate. There were setbacks, mistakes, moments when even Ethan questioned whether the company could survive. Yet something unusual happened. Employees stopped leaving. Then former employees began returning. Word spread throughout the industry. Novatech was changing. More importantly, it was changing for the better. 9 months after Ethan arrived, the company launched a new AI platform. Industry experts expected modest results. Instead, the product exploded. Major corporations signed contracts within weeks. Revenue surged. Investor confidence returned. The company's valuation doubled, then tripled, then doubled again. Business magazines began publishing articles about Novatech's remarkable recovery. Journalists wanted interviews. Financial analysts wanted explanations. Competitors wanted to know how a company that had been months away from bankruptcy had suddenly become one of the fastest-growing technology firms in China. The answer was simple. Leadership, something Novatech had lacked for years. One afternoon, Ethan was reviewing reports when Daniel Brooks entered his office. The veteran executive looked unusually pleased. You're going to want to see this. He handed over a financial report. Ethan examined the numbers. Then read them again. A smile slowly appeared. This can't be right. It is. Ethan leaned back. For the first time in company history, Novatech had recorded quarterly profits larger than some of its oldest competitors. Daniel laughed. You know what's funny? What? A year ago, everyone thought this company was finished. Ethan nodded. A year ago, everyone thought I was finished too. Daniel grinned. Looks like they were wrong twice. The business world was beginning to agree. But the biggest surprise was still waiting. Because success attracts attention, especially from people who once ignored you. And in Shanghai, certain members of the Carter family were finally starting to notice Ethan's name appearing everywhere. Unfortunately for them, they noticed too late. Part 3. The People Who Laughed. The Carter Group headquarters occupied the top floors of one of Shanghai's most prestigious skyscrapers. On paper, the company remained successful. In reality, cracks were spreading everywhere. Since Ethan's departure, Performance had steadily declined. Projects were delayed. Costs increased. Clients complained. Investors grew nervous. Ryan Carter continued presenting impressive speeches and polished presentations. But presentations could not hide reality forever. One morning, the boardroom was unusually tense. Shareholders demanded answers. Financial reports showed another disappointing quarter. Ryan stood before the board confidently. The market conditions are challenging. Nobody looked convinced. One board member adjusted his glasses. Market conditions seemed challenging for everyone except Novatech. Silence filled the room. Ryan's smile weakened. Another director spoke. Their revenue increased nearly 400%. A third director added, "They've become one of the most valuable technology companies in the region." The chairman folded his hands. "And their CEO is your brother." Ryan clenched his jaw. The comparison was becoming impossible to avoid. Everything Ethan touched seemed to succeed. Everything Ryan touched seemed to struggle. After the meeting ended, Ryan stormed into his office. His father followed. Both men were furious. Not at themselves. At Ethan. Because it was easier to blame him than admit the truth. Months later, Novatech announced a major international partnership. The news dominated financial media. Investors celebrated. The company's valuation reached extraordinary levels. For the first time, Novatech became larger than several divisions of Carter Group combined. That evening, Ethan attended a prestigious business conference in Shanghai. Ironically, it was the same conference that had once refused to invite him after his public dismissal. Now he was the keynote speaker. As Ethan stepped onto the stage, hundreds of executives stood and applauded. The sound filled the massive hall. Near the back sat Ryan and their father. Neither joined the applause. They simply watched. Watched the man they had discarded become one of the most respected leaders in the country. Ethan delivered a speech about leadership, accountability, and resilience. He never mentioned his family, never criticized anyone, never sought revenge. Yet somehow that made the contrast even more painful. Because success had become his answer. After the speech ended, reporters surrounded him. Questions came rapidly. What motivated your comeback? Did you ever regret leaving Carter Group? Do you have a message for people who doubted you? The crowd waited. Ethan smiled, then gave an answer that would be quoted across countless newspapers. When people underestimate you, they give you something valuable. The reporters leaned closer. What is it? Freedom. The next morning, those words appeared everywhere. And somewhere in Shanghai, the people who once laughed began realizing a terrible truth. Ethan had never needed them. They had needed him. Part 4. Nobody laughed a year later. Exactly 1 year after Ethan walked out of the Imperial Crown Hotel, another gala was held. This time, the atmosphere was very different. The guest list included the most powerful entrepreneurs, investors, and executives in the country. And one name stood above all others. Ethan Carter. When his arrival was announced, conversations stopped. People turned. Cameras flashed. Executives rushed forward to greet him. The same social circles that had once mocked him now competed for his attention. The irony wasn't lost on Ethan. Near the ballroom entrance stood several individuals he recognized. Former friends who had vanished. Business associates who had ignored his calls. People who had laughed. Now they smiled nervously, hoping he wouldn't remember. He remembered. He simply didn't care. The greatest victory was no longer proving them wrong. It was no longer needing their approval. As the evening continued, Ethan eventually found himself face-to-face with Ryan. For several moments, neither spoke. Ryan looked older, more tired. The confidence that once bordered on arrogance had largely disappeared. Finally, he broke the silence. "You won." Ethan looked at him calmly. "This was never a competition." Ryan laughed bitterly. "Maybe not for you." The younger man lowered his head, then asked the question that had haunted him for months. "How did you do it?" Ethan considered the answer, then replied honestly, "I stopped wasting energy trying to convince people of my value." Ryan stared at him. Ethan continued, "I spent years chasing recognition." He glanced around the ballroom. "Everything changed when I started focusing on results instead." For once, Ryan had no response. Because deep down, he knew Ethan was right. Their father approached moments later. The older man looked uncomfortable, a position he rarely occupied. "Ethan." The single word carried regret. Years of it. But some opportunities never return. Some relationships cannot be repaired simply because one side finally recognizes their mistakes. "I'm proud of what you've accomplished," his father said quietly. Ethan studied him. The man who had chosen convenience over truth. Favoritism over fairness. Politics over family. Perhaps he genuinely regretted it now. Perhaps he didn't. Either way, the past remained unchanged. Thank you, Ethan replied politely. Nothing more. Nothing less. Because forgiveness and trust are not the same thing. As the night progressed, Novitek received the award for Company of the Year. The audience rose in a standing ovation. Ethan walked to the stage. 1 year earlier, he had left a ballroom while people laughed. Now he stood before an audience that respected him. Not because of his family name. Not because of inheritance. Not because of connections. Because he earned it. Looking across the crowd, Ethan noticed something remarkable. Nobody was laughing. The people who had mocked him were silent. The people who doubted him were silent. The people who dismissed him were silent. Success had a way of ending arguments. As applause thundered through the hall, Ethan remembered the night he lost everything. The humiliation. The betrayal. The laughter. At the time, it felt like the end of his story. In reality, it had been the beginning. Sometimes life removes you from places where you no longer belong. Sometimes losing everything creates room for something greater. And sometimes the people who celebrate your downfall unknowingly witness the first chapter of your greatest success. 1 year earlier, Ethan Carter walked away with nothing. 1 year later, he had built something nobody could take from him. His future, his reputation, his legacy. And as the applause continued, one truth became impossible to ignore. Everyone laughed when he walked away. Nobody laughed a year later.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more manhwa style stories. Comment your favorite moment.